right? That's better. Full charge. Let's go. As one does, I woke up this morning and decided to sit down and watch an hour-long breakdown on the negatives of self-driving cars, and it made me realize the amount of other industries that have acted the same, how they come with big promises of solving society's problems, and really are the ones creating the problems that they're now selling the solution to. This was extremely evident through the writer strikes of last year that left the movie industry paralyzed, because you had these streaming services come in that were completely and utterly subsidized by venture capitalists. Then all of a sudden, look how cheap it is to get access to all of these films. And then us as consumers are like, great, wow, look how cheap it is to get access to all these films. And then they're like, psych, we actually need a profit now so we can pay off our debts and bring returns to our investors. So now we're going to be jacking the price up, running ads on your stuff. We're going to stop producing new materials and we're going to be paying our people less. And you're like, so what was the point of all this? You just basically destroyed the industry, loaded yourself with debt, and now we're getting screwed again just because you came in with the promise of solving all our problems and providing us so much access to stuff you never really intended to keep going. And then you could have the same for Uber. They came in, undermined the taxi industry. I'm not saying the taxi industry was perfect, but they said, wow, look at this amazing thing. You have an app that can tell you when the car is coming. It's cheaper than a taxi. Great, amazing. And then they started needing to bring profits. And guess what? Once the taxi industry was undermined, once people started using them as the default purchase because it was cheaper, they can jack the prices again, and now it's no longer cheaper than a taxi. Occasionally it will be, but often a taxi can be way cheaper, especially when there's surge pricing. And this brings us back to what I was watching this morning, which I'll leave a link down in the description because it is just amazing and also haunting at the future that it lays out in front of us. And is a perfect example of why we shouldn't fall for these promises of utopia that will never arrive and will instead bring a dystopia as a result. The only people who will be living the high life are the ones who are the owners of these businesses who will be raking in profits because they've completely and utterly obliterated any competition that would have brought genuine value to us as society. The first thing is that generally self-driving cars are just pretty dumb, right? Sure, they can kind of keep straight line, maybe they can see if a massive object has flown in front of them, but they get stopped consistently by just putting a cone on their hood. Or there are so many examples where they just stop in the middle of the freeway for no reason whatsoever. And half the time, it's not about knowing when to stop when something's in front of it, because that's easy. It's knowing when not to stop when something's in front of it. When you go and do your driving test, there is a specific rule, a specific question that says, if an animal runs in front of your car, do not hit the brakes. Because if you hit the brakes, other people behind you are going to run into the back of you. And yes, there's legislation that if they run into the back of you, that's technically their fault because they should have kept a safe distance. That's not how things work in practice. And it happens, I don't know about often, but it does happen, where a self-driving car on a freeway will just hit the brakes and it has caused an 8-car pileup behind it because there was absolutely nothing in front and it just freaked out. Another example provided was where a car ran over an individual. It wasn't its fault that it ran over the person, they just ended up in front because they got hit by another car, whatever. But the point being, as soon as the individual was under the car, it's like, oh, no object permanence. I got the object permanence of like a 6-month-old, so I'm going to keep driving. So the person got dragged underneath that car for ages until it realized something was wrong. So these vehicles are not smart. And they will only keep getting safer until the point they don't have to anymore. Because these are profit-driven companies. They will advertise, oh my God, we're trying to create a safer future, until they don't have to anymore, until they can keep selling these vehicles, until the regulators say it is safe enough, and then they won't care. There are literal numbers that these organizations produce of like, what is the risk allowance for the death of someone, one of our employees, one of our contractors, one of members of the community. And if they don't have to make things safe, they won't, because they're not criminally responsible. Maybe they'll receive a little fine if they're unlucky, but it's pathetic. Because governments are afraid to give fines to these organizations, because if they fine an organization too high, the organization collapses and you lose a ton of innocent jobs, right? Not a good thing. So you can't have massive fines that actually cripple an organization, because then you cripple the workforce. It's like, well, easy solution. Why don't you just criminally prosecute the people who made the decisions that led to the outcome? Which does happen in a lot of circumstances. You can be fired if you steal an apple from the workplace, but your boss can't be fired. Or if they are fired, they're given a phenomenally golden parachute when they make decisions that literally lead to the death of employees. It doesn't make sense, because guess who writes the legislation? Guess who lobbies for that legislation? The ones with the money and the power, not you. And this comes back to the self-driving cars. The people in the ivory towers aren't going to be the ones impacted, it's the people on the ground levels of the street. The ones who the architecture has continuously been designed around. If you go anywhere in Europe, It is phenomenal. Streets are walkable. It's beautiful. You've got little cafes on the sides of the streets. And yes, there's still an odd car here or there for like a delivery or something. But you don't need them because you walk. And if you can't walk, you catch a train. In what world would you ever need a car? The only reason some of my family members in Europe use a car is because they've kept upping the price of trains so much that sometimes it is a bit cheaper to drive from their town to Amsterdam. But if trains kept their prices lower because they weren't all sold off and privatized in a lot of cases, then all of a sudden it would be actually reasonable to catch a train everywhere, which pretty much everyone does anyway, because it's just more convenient, it's quicker, it's easier, you don't have to stress, you don't have to pay attention to the road, you get on, you get off, and you're done. In a lot of cases, I prefer to catch a train to mainland Europe, but I end up having to fly because flights are so subsidized. It's like, oh wow, it's like £60 to catch a flight, or it's £300 one way to get a train, and you're like, the fuck's going on here? Where if everything were priced out accordingly in terms of efficiency, you can transport way more people on a train for a lot less cost than you can a plane. But it's not how subsidies have been laid out. So they keep trying to ban plane flights. It's like, first you need to decrease the cost of the trains. But if we're not going back to the plane and trains argument, but trains and cars, when architecture is built for vehicles, vehicles will dominate. There's whole swabs of evidence and research into the matter where if you build an extra lane in a highway, you don't decrease congestion, you increase traffic because people who weren't driving now drive. And it's the same thing with transport. If you increase public transport options, people won't drive, they'll catch public transport. I would never think to drive into the city in Sydney or drive into the city in London because transport is so much easier. But if I were to try and get across the city in Sydney, absolutely I'll drive. Because trying to get a bus all the way across takes twice as long. Once again, to the city, the trains are lovely. Across, it's a bit of a pain. So when the public transport options are there, people will absolutely take them. One of the best examples of public transport I had ever seen. Yes, Europe's great. But when I was in New York, not the New York subway, well, kind of, but outside the stadium in Brooklyn. Because guess what? People kind of come there at dispersing times because, some people want to get there last minute. Some people want to get there a bit earlier, watch some of the pre-talk, watch a bit of the warm-ups. So everyone kind of gets there at a different time. And when everyone leaves at the same time, there's numerous different train stops that people can get off at. There's numerous different bus stops that people can take. And it means not everyone is loaded onto one thing to try and get home and forced to maybe take a car instead. The problem with trying to get home from like Sydney Olympic Park, after you've just watched some sort of concert or sporting event, is that everyone from these 100,000 people stadiums have to go to one train station. So you're always trying to sprint there so you're the first one out before these crowds come. And then great, you get to this one train station, it's pretty good, it works well, the system's fine, and then you get back to your general area, like you might get back to the city, and then you're stuck. Because it's past 12 p.m, trains have stopped running, and you're screwed. And then you're like, shit, I'm too tired, I've been standing on my feet for 14 hours, I could usually walk home because Sydney's very walkable. But I've been on my feet for 14 hours and I don't want to. So guess what? You have to call an Uber. And the Uber's probably overpriced. It has to come over from 3 suburbs. It's like if you just had these transport options running, rather than saying, you need a plan B so you don't drink and drive, then offer the option, rather than just cancelling it altogether. But that was a little bit of a tangent. But if things have been constantly prioritized, like European streets and American streets used to look very similar in the 20th century, but one ended up repealing a lot of that driving infrastructure, one ended up keep going. So you don't have a choice in the US but to own a car in most places, unless you're like in New York, whatever. But in places like Europe, you wouldn't dream of it unless you absolutely had to, because just the costs are so high to own your own vehicle. Additionally, a lot of the vehicles are trained on the easiest streets possible. Chuck them in the streets of Arizona where everything is nice and gridded off, the streets are nice and wide, everything's designed for cars in perfect weather. Guess what? Try putting them on the snowy streets of Utah or the chaotic streets of Amsterdam where you've got trams, other cars, bicyclists, everything going crazy. There is no chance they would be able to handle that. And guess what? Their budget. They're just going to be trying to copy-paste the software over and hope it works. And how many people will get hurt in the process. And of course, because they have this profit motive, they're going to be lobbying like crazy, spending billions of dollars trying to get local governments to prioritize their vehicles over pedestrians, which is exactly what happened at the start of the 20th century when things went from horses to cars. They introduced marketing campaigns. The whole term of jaywalker was introduced to discriminate against pedestrians, to prioritize vehicles over everything else, even though they were killing thousands of people in the street. And the problem is you have people like Elon Musk come in and say, look, we're going to build the Hyperloop. It's going to be this amazing tunnel that gets people from A to B super quickly. It's going to be great and safe. And then it turns out a couple of years later, you realize the only reason he put that forward was so that he could stop the construction of high-speed rail, and he had no intention of ever actually making that thing. And then he doubles down on his hate for pedestrians by building the Cybertruck, which is just a civilian death machine. When the bonnet is this high, and the car hits you, right? I'm dead. I'm being dragged under the car, I'm gone. But if the bonnet is this high, I fall over the top, maybe I break my legs, but I'm good. I'm fine, I will live. It's the same reason speed limits are being reduced in lots of areas. Like back in Sydney, they were dropping everything from 50 to 40 or 40 to 30 because the hospitalization rates drop massively. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like something in the realm of like, if someone hits you at 50 Ks, there's like 80% chance you go to hospital. If they hit you at 40 Ks, there's like a 30% chance you go to hospital. It's like outlandish decreases in fatalities and injuries just by dropping the speed limit and by having cars' bonnets lower. But when you have these Americanized cars that are huge and just whack a pedestrian at high speeds in infrastructure where you are forced to cross a dangerous road, of course there's going to be problems. Versus European streets where cars are going 10 Ks an hour tops, slowly avoiding pedestrians. This is to say, don't believe the propaganda they put out that streets will be safer because cars will be driving them rather than people. I was like, you know what would be safer? Not having the cars in the first place, having a nice train that can transport significantly more people than a car-based society ever could, and that effectively never has issues that go wrong with it. The worst that will happen is there's like a fault in the track and the train has to stop for a minute. Oh cool, what a big deal, it beats a 10-car pile-up on the highway. The film industry used to be profitable because you would make a film, you'd put it out in cinemas, you'd earn a big bit of revenue, then you'd put it out on DVD, earn a big bit of revenue over again, and great, you're profitable. Now with films, you make the film, maybe you put it out in cinemas if you're lucky, okay, you earn a bit of revenue there, and then that's it, you sell it to a streamer for effectively nothing. It's just not profitable to produce things anymore. People get paid less, there's huge layoffs. You keep seeing reports from industries in Hollywood that basically say, do not become our job. Because if you become our job, you will never find employment. Because there are so many people out of work due to this industry that has just completely demolished the previous format. Once again, streaming can be great. But now all of a sudden, there is no choice. And it'll be the same with things like automated cars, where yes, there should be automated vehicles in certain instances. There's going to be huge benefits that come from that sort of technology where things can just operate in a safer manner. But you've got to be careful that it doesn't take out the current. If automated vehicles come on, they'll continue their lobbying for infrastructure to be built for them. They'll create problems where cars are dangerous. So you've got to keep pedestrians away from cars, which means cars get prioritized. Pedestrians have to take shitty routes and living in shitty cities. And all of a sudden they're like, look, we're the only solution. You have to buy an electric car or a self-driving car because what's the alternative? You walk across these streets and get hit. So you must use our service. But they've just created the very problem that they've claimed to solve. But there has been a fight against it. Like I was saying earlier with the 20th century, how a lot of European streets that used to feel like Utrecht had a canal that they filled in and turned that into a highway. And they're like, this is a bad idea. So they unfilled it in and made it back into a canal because these cities do not become livable. And there have been many areas in the United States where they've started tearing down all of these highway infrastructures because once again, they separate neighborhoods, they destroy communities. So trying to fight back at obtaining our communities again, which is a tough fight when you have these lobbyists, when you have everything built towards this one set of infrastructure. But it is a fight that must be fought. A local example for me, my mates and I, we were filming a video. Very random, but we were trying to hit every Macca's from 5 Dock in Sydney to Circular Quay, which is like a way out to the city centre, which is a long walk. It's like 17k or something. And there are like 10 Macca's along that road. But that road is one of the worst in Sydney because it used to be an area with shops and thriving communities. But now, because it's like a 6-lane highway, all of a sudden, no one wants to build a business there because who wants to sit at a cafe when there's a 6-lane highway next to you? So the whole street has been destroyed.
Every now and then, you'll just find you've got to step out into the carriageway.
This is a drop obstacle for the wheelchairs.
But it's only 2 minutes to the next Macca's. Is McDonald's the only business that can survive on Parramatta Road? They solved traffic. It's the opportunity to climb 2 flights of stairs without any choice in the matter because I don't know if you can see any Macca's, Tommy. Parramatta Road gets a pretty bad rap for, under-investing in pedestrians and cyclists and over-investing in cars. But the truth is, look at this. They've painted a line. That's pretty impressive. Now, many people think of Parramatta Road as unsafe, but as this sign clearly demonstrates, despite clearly being hit by a bus, it survived. So hopefully you will too. Hey mate, just a quick question. Are you excited to drive on Parramatta Road today?
No.
What's your experience like as a pedestrian on Parramatta Road?
It's shit.
Yeah?
I live on Parramatta Road. Like,
Oh, mate, that's grim. Can you really live?
Yay.
Can you really live here?
no.
Hey, mate, you excited to drive on Parramatta Road today?
Nah, but it's better than Victoria Road.
Better than Victoria Road. Is that because of the interchange?
Correct. And I've got to go through that fucking shit show.
Oh, well.
A lot of the classic.
I mean, it's clear as day. I could walk straight out there and I'd be absolutely fine.
Mate, we survived. I don't know what Josh was worried about.
Why would you travel to Europe for the canals when you can check out the beautiful Hawthorn Canal from the side of Parramatta Road?
And that's just a prime example of what happens when vehicles are prioritized over people. The problem with profit-driven organizations is that the line must always go up. That you always must be getting new customers, that you always must be making more money. It's the problem with factors like GDP, that countries are like, we need to make sure GDP goes up. But just because GDP goes up, which is broadly the value of goods and services produced, doesn't mean that people are living a better life. Productivity has increased massively over the past 100 years. But have quality of life been getting much better? Slightly, but not much. They're not being paid more. More people are in poverty than prior. This constant need for growth, for shareholder profits, causes huge issues, and to assume that it's only capitalist markets that innovate is also just a complete lie produced by these capitalist organizations to continue funneling money into their pockets. Because for one, guess who invented the jet engine which is used in all planes nowadays? The Nazis. Okay, maybe not a good example, but that's a government organization. Who invented internet and the Wi-Fi? The US military and CSIRO, which is a government-funded Australian organization. Guess who invented a key part of the solar panel? My old university back in Sydney. These are all socialist institutions here that engaged in innovation that these private companies would not. And a lot of the time, these private companies take huge investments from the government, take huge subsidies from the government. And guess who keeps the profits? Them. Not us. We paid for it as the taxpayer, and we receive none of the benefit for it. So to live in a system where we keep handing those organizations subsidies after subsidies, we keep giving these gas and coal companies, we keep giving these auto vehicle organizations huge swabs of money to do this investment into services that do not benefit us in any way whatsoever. They just disintegrate the systems we do have and only line their pockets. Like during COVID, when the government started handing out huge bits of money to these organizations that were on the brink of collapse, like, yes, sometimes you need to do that because you're creating an artificial shutdown. You need money to carry them through, right? This crisis, fair. But the fact that for the big organizations, the government didn't take equity, they gave them billions of dollars for free, for nothing. If they really wanted, they should have had a rainy day fund. But they don't keep a rainy day fund because they know they'll be bailed out. When they're too big to fail, they have nothing to lose. They'll run everything to the edge because they know if it all goes to shit, they will be saved. You have here in the UK that the Thames water is going under. They have huge amounts of debt, and that largely happened after it was privatised. Thanks, Thatcher. And all of the train lines, they're slowly being reacquired by the government because once they go broke, it just pretty much gets given back to the government because these profit-driven companies are not good at running these services. I'm not saying that all profit-driven companies are bad, but there is a clear disalignment in incentives that gets created. It is not for the benefit of the consumer, it is how little benefit can we give to the consumer while they're still coming to us. Imagine if Woolworths went to Coles, or Tesco to Sainsbury's, or like Powerade to Gatorade, and they're like, we're going to price our product at effectively $0 so that we can get in new customers. Like, the ACCC would be on their ass. Any anti-competitive consumer protections commission would be onto them for this anti-competitive behavior that they're destroying competition and hence benefits to the consumer. But when it is a parallel industry, like Uber to taxis, like Netflix to the film industry, like cars are to public transport, they don't care, nothing happens. Because, wow, we're just, a better product. We're able to produce it for a cheaper price. We're bringing benefit to the consumer for now, but in 5-10 years, we are the ones that are going to get screwed because we are living in a society without those first products that actually benefited us. And now you hold all monopolistic power. You can raise the price as much as you want because we don't have a choice. And from this video, again, a good point that was made, which I never quite considered before. But yes, like a lot of air pollution comes from, carbon fuels, whatever. But a lot of it also comes from the wear and tear of the tires and the roads themselves. And then once cars pass like 50 miles, 50 k's an hour, the loudness actually comes from the wheels on the road, not the engine. So cities aren't loud. It's actually cars that are loud. If you're in a bustling city centre and it's just people, no vehicles, it's quiet as. Maybe some good people like eating at a local cafe, maybe some voices of people getting excited watching a football game, but that's it. But when you have a city like New York, which was amazing, I love New York, but you can never get away from the car noise. Every single part of the city has more cars than birds. And that's what I love about London, at least, is you can hear birds without hearing cars. There are huge swabs of carless areas that you can just wander into and enjoy. Like, you want to have a nice little walk along the west side of, or the east side of New York, it's a full highway next to you. There is no like, oh, it's lovely and peaceful. The west side's a bit better though, because it's a bit more parkland, it's a lot more peaceful. The east side is just pure vehicle noise, a huge prioritization of that mode of transport. But at least New York knows to have a subway because they just don't have enough street space for everyone to have cars, so they've been forced to adapt for that. This is just to say, don't buy into the bullshit when companies say we are building a utopian society without innovation. Think, what are the incentive structures here? What is the actual long-term outcome? Great, we maybe have safer streets because it's vehicles, it's computers driving cars rather than humans which can get easily distracted. But what is a society when it is completely overrun by self-driving vehicles? What is a society when artists can't be paid to produce their art and we just have a bunch of streaming services that really provide us nothing anymore? What is a society when all of a sudden all our fundamental resources are managed by people who have an incentive to bring as many profits as possible and as little benefits to us? We need to make sure that when we make leaps forward, we make sure that we wield the benefits and not a couple of shareholders at the top. Wealth inequality has never really been higher. And it's because we have bought into the bullshit that this capitalist-driven economy is bringing us benefit. And it did, initially. For the first couple of decades, great, people could own their homes, amazing. Now we live in a society where we can't afford our own home. We can't afford rent. We can't afford food. We can't afford vehicles. And it's more and more prioritized by, once again, the smaller and smaller number of organizations that own the global wealth, that own the global structures that dictate how we live in our societies and our communities. So make sure that when they tell you this will be great, double check and think, actually, will it? Or is there some other nefarious purpose here that they're going to bring out from under the table in just a couple of years' time? But also don't be completely skeptical. There are some amazing innovations coming out that will absolutely improve the society that we live in. But be careful. Make sure that it's indeed bringing society, that it is indeed for the right benefit, that it isn't just Sam Altman saying, oh my God, OpenAI is for the benefit of society, and then decides to profitize it on Microsoft's behalf because he is being promised billions of dollars in return. So don't just believe what everyone says. Actually think, will this help me in my community? Is there a tangential solution here that it actually benefit? That it's not going from horses to cars, it's not going from cars to more cars. It's actually, could the benefit be going from cars to no cars? So I wish you well to keep up the fight in keeping our communities forever ours. Make sure to subscribe to see more and absolutely comment on any other examples that I may have missed.